I've been watching it. Me and Sarah's been watching a TV show called Uncanny, with is it Tom Robbins on BBC Two?
Danny Robbins, isn't it?
Danny Robbins.
Yeah,
Danny
the
Robbins.
podcast series first of all, which I quite liked.
Yes. And so, are you Team Believer or Team Skeptic? I mean, for me, it's a load of bullshit. I mean, it just is. It's a load of bullshit. But and it's the first kind of proper BBC podcast to television effort. And it's a load of bullshit. But the motifs that they use, that they it's a really cheap. I mean, it's a podcast or TV adaptation. There's 3 scenes, and I reckon they've all been filmed over 2 days, possibly.
Right.
There's a pub where he talks to an expert on ghosts, and an expert on being a skeptic. And there's a room where they interview the person who's seen the ghost, which is this kind of like big hall, probably like a BBC facility or like an old theatre or something. And then you've got Danny Robbins's shed. So it's just really cheap stuff. But the motifs that they use, like they'll put subdued lighting in this place where they interview the punter. And it's really dark, and there's just like a tiny spotlight on Robbins and the person who reckons have seen a spooker. And they've got like they've got like someone sort of like fiddling with like, they've got this massive mixing desk that's got like maybe 150 levers and faders and dials when they're just guaranteed that's going into a Zoom recorder. 2 inputs, that's all that's happening, but you've got this person going whoop, 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 and the lights are dazzling, the lights are sort of flashing on and off and stuff, and there's all this motif sort of going, this is an important interview, but none of that is being used. It's all just set dressing. There's a camera that very much annoys me, like a point and shoot sort of Sony job that's kind of in shot. Like the sort of set is sort of saying, this is ad hoc, this is DIY, this is more important than the other investigations that you've seen before because it's so DIY and it's so
They're
kind of like...
planting these things in your mind almost subconsciously, right?
Yeah, and so you've got the camera, and we never see footage from the camera because it's just a point and shoot, and they probably wouldn't film with that. They'll be filmed with a decent lad behind the scenes. But and Robbins is sort of dipping out and going, wow, just had to take a break there because it got a bit intense. Just thought I'd give everyone a break, and what I can't believe, and he just and it's all a performance, and it's all for my taste. I think you know how I feel about it. But it's
you have quite a hard time dealing with reality as it presents itself.
I don't trust reality.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is like a whole fucking new ball game. I totally understand that. But
it's I think it's disappointing that it's like the only podcast to TV sort of adaptation that I think the BBC have done, and it's a ghost podcast for one, which I have very little time for.
I kind of get that. I listened to the podcast series. I think it might have been originally on the radio as well.
Right.
Radio 4 maybe. I quite liked it. I thought it was quite... Here's the thing though, and I know you're not saying this, but just I haven't seen this show, but my feeling would just be that there's sometimes, in fact quite regularly I think, a category definition error between like what is capable of, what's possible with audio and what's possible with vision. I think the reason that Danny Robbins' show, the podcast version, is good is because you, as ever with audio, particularly in that type of subject, you paint the pictures yourself. You imagine what's happening. Like there's a brilliant episode of that show where he's in some old bothy up in rural Scotland that's apparently haunted, and he goes there. And he records a load of tape and a load of atmosphere, and he gets people to tell their kind of eyewitness stories and everything. And it's fucking chilling. It was absolutely chilling. But I think in the same way that, remember when Ricky Gervais's podcast used to be really great, and then they put it on to cartoons on Channel 4, and it was just a bit fucking bit crap because like you get
it's like 4 years too late, and if you're a fan of that, you will have listened to it anyway.
And you're being anchored by these weird Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
But it's always what people do. It's always what people sort of go, and I'll get someone to animate it. Why?
Yeah,
just why?
We've done a bit of that, and it didn't work either. Look, I think on the subject matter of what you're talking about with Danny Robbins, that's a BBC show called Uncanny. In case you guys listening didn't hear around the first time around, I'm always super skeptical about ghosts and that kind of thing, but just because I think a lot of it is quite easily explained. There's lots of it is explained by the environment. lots of it is explained by the evolutionary benefit of imagining things that aren't there. I mean, this is something that's kind of been imbued in the human brain for hundreds of thousands of years. I've read quite a lot about it. It's beneficial.
But surely UFOs are just this, but further away.
Well,
it's a ghost happening over there.
You know what they say? Solar
the
power,
Grey Lady of the Skies.
Solar power is just nuclear power from a safe distance, right? But no, maybe there is an element of that. Maybe so clearly some of the basics here are definitely transferable, because if you are, we are evolutionary beings that have grown up in the way we've grown up, and it is clearly beneficial for us to imagine seeing things, predators, dangers in the darkness sometimes that aren't there. It's much more evil. Even if you don't know anything about evolution, you can understand that it would be beneficial for a species to be more careful than not, right? That's basically what it is. And that Uncanny episode I talked about with the bothy up in Scotland, I read a load of stuff around it afterwards. What it was is some kind of there was something to do with some really high electromagnetic field or something, which made people's bodies react in a certain way, which they then interpreted as like their spines being chilled. And
bothies are spooky anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like bothies are cool and spooky.
No one ever sees a ghost during the day, right?
No.
Even though there's a lot more light and you'd be much more likely to see it. And then there's also that thing, isn't there, that Professor Brian Cox does, where he deconstructs ghosts as a not really actually able to obey the laws of physics and therefore not be possible. So yeah, there's lots of different things like that. I happen to think though the element that you put in with like unidentified flying objects or whatever it may be is just that the universe is so observably vast that you can't really rule anything out. And I guess the kind of the evidence in opposition to that is that I wonder if people were seeing UFOs and doing cave drawings of them back in the day or whatever, because if they weren't, it seems to be a bit of a modern phenomenon. It's interesting when you see like photographs of UFOs from the 70s. The UFOs are basically like a 70s vehicle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're very much of their time.
Future sci-fi, yeah.
It's almost like a future sci-fi thing. So anyway, I will check out an episode of Uncanny because I did really enjoy the podcast, and I think Danny Roberts is quite an emotive and interesting presenter. Actually.
Oh, I mean, it's all about him, and it sounds. I mean, I'm watching it, and I know a load of people who are also watching it. Some of them through gritted teeth, more or less than me. But it's clearly going to be a bit of a hit, and we'll clearly see another season. I think it's only like 3 or 4 episodes or something, but it's just that whole world is intrinsically funny, and there's just so many spots where they could have done something funny, but because it's a sort of like reverential kind of ghostly romp. They don't bother. Like there's a moment. There's the ghost lady who's very into ghosts, who believes ghosts, who has presumably got some kind of qualification in knowing about ghosts. She's this kind of like a Scottish.
But there is no qualification possible, is there? I mean, you basically.
Well, I think there's probably like kind of like sort of quasi-scientific kind of next to ghost hunter, you know what I mean? Like, there's probably something.
Like Bill Murray.
Yeah, like chartered surveying, but for ghosts. I don't know, but it's kind of like she's this kind of like she's a Scottish woman, sort of like Betty Page kind of like vintage dress lady. And there's a moment where this woman is walking down the street, and I think the shop that she's. Suddenly it turns into Goodnight Sweetheart, and the shops in front of her sell like all old lady 50s dresses. And Tom and John Robbins, what was his name? Danny Robbins. Danny Robbins at that point could go, you would have bloody loved that. He doesn't. He doesn't fucking do it.
He's missed a beat.
Doesn't
That's
fucking
not acceptable. That's unforgivable.
It's unforgivable.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But so there's Team Skeptic and Team Believer, and the Team Believer lady, she's this ghost lady, and they're just doing it, recording it in a pub round the corner from the BBC. They've hired up how many clip shows, how many interviews do you see in central London W1D pub function rooms? Like there are so many. They're just like, give the landlord 70 quid, we're going to record. I've recorded millions of them. Video games Save My Life.
I've interviewed him at
Premier League years. Exactly, all that toss, right? You get your lights set up, you try and time it with people rolling barrels into the pub, and you sort it out like that. But but in this case, they will have had to change clothes about 3 or 4 times, which is very humorous. But because it would have just been a day's booking, and maybe I'm just a bit too behind baseball.
You're a bit annoyed by the production values rather than the show itself.
I think I can be both.
It's not mutually exclusive.
I think it's quantum dissatisfaction.
I would happily go to any of these haunted places or UFO hotspots with you, Pete Donaldson.
Look, who's been on a ghost hunt recently? I have.
Yeah, but you
until 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's boring. There's too much.
That's boring. It's too late.
If the ghosts aren't going to fucking do their bit, then I don't think you should be expected. They've got nothing on. They've got absolutely nothing going on.
Exactly.
They should be able to do it.
Mithering around.
Yeah.
Wibbling around.
I will check that show out just to see if it's any good. But
you'd like it because it's spooky and you like spooky stuff.